Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu, and not here today is Stefan Bienkowski, but that's fine because I recruited, well, they're pretty much the usual cast now. It's just how it is. And that's Chris Williams and Matt Ford. First of all, Chris, how are you doing? Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for inviting me back on. Doing very well, thanks. Lots going on. Tons of football, a little bit of a break coming up. But yeah, I'm very good, thank you.
Yeah, inviting you on, like, come on, you're a staple. Founding member of this podcast. It's always good to hear your voice. And Matt, how are you doing? How is the international break treating you?
I quite like international breaks. Mainly that I tend to switch off for a little bit. So it's like having a little break in the season. So yeah, nice to have a break and nice to look back over the proper football before the other football starts.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy it too. I took a little bit of a break. I'm doing this podcast, and Stefan is taking the other two podcasts this week because I'm on holiday. I'm in Montreal for a week. I've been asked by a lot of people if I'm going to go to the German games in Hartford and Philadelphia, and I'm like, nah, I need a break. But yeah, guys, we have a lot to chat about. So we're going to make the introduction round really quick and go straight into the ad and then talk Dortmund, Union Berlin. We have Leverkusen. We have a lot about Köln. I know, Matt, you're an expert here, so I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about Köln. We're going to touch a little bit about Stuttgart too. Lots of great topics. So let's dive into it right after this break. This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. Football is back, and BetOnline is your number one information source for all your sports wagering info with all the up-to-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals from the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistics, news, and odds. From Week 1 all the way to college football playoff and Super Bowl, BetOnline gives you access to the best football promotions and contests available anywhere online. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, boys, let's do this. Let's chat some real football, not American football, because who cares about that? I want to start with the Dortmund Union Berlin game. And Chris, Dortmund scored 4 goals on Union. I tipped 3-2 for this game, and someone joked about me. Made a joke that, you know, if Dortmund actually managed to score 3 goals or more, they would buy me a beer at the next American football game I'm going to. So Eric Brunagel, I like hazy IPAs. I'll tell you where you can find me at this Apple Cup thing that I'm going to in November. So just want to give you a shout out here. But Chris, 4 goals by Dortmund against Union Berlin. This, I think, was a much needed result for them, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, most definitely for Dortmund. I think people have, me included, have asked a little questions of them lately. Are they serious title challengers? Have they got, what's needed to sustain that? Are they, I don't want to say that, I don't want to question their mentality because I don't want Marco Reus coming after me, but it's an age-old question, isn't it? Have Dortmund got what it takes to win the title? As we saw last year, no. But it was a real big result for them because I think it was under a little bit of pressure. And against a side that have, for the last couple of seasons, been playing really well. And it wasn't that long ago that I was at the flip of this fixture where Union Berlin beat Dortmund in Copenhagen, and it was a fantastic game to be at. And yeah, so it normally is a challenge, and one that they came through in the end. But once again, they were asked questions early on, weren't they?
Yeah, Matt and Chris, I know you probably have some opinions about this too. before we talk about all the good stuff for Dortmund and then some of the bad stuff about Union Berlin, let's talk about VAR. Because we had the WhatsApp chat going like crazy on this VAR and, all the discussions around it. Remind me again, how often did VAR get involved in this first half? 3 times? Matt, do you remember?
Yeah, I think I noted down 3 times. And I was actually quite interested to see that when I was noting them down, I was doing so with the help of the highlights and actually making a note of when the whistle was blown for a certain foul and then counting the time until the actual penalty or whatever decision was made, and counted up each time, 4 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it was, and then noticed that there were only 6 minutes in inverted commas added on at the end of the first half. When there must have been more in terms of just based on my really, really amateur counting off the highlights package. But then I also came across an article in Kicker magazine here in Germany pointing out that there had actually been a total of 15 minutes of VAR delay in that first half, but only 6 minutes added time. So I'd probably trust their figures a bit more than mine. So it was certainly certainly a significant feature of the first half. I think it really was a game of 2 halves. I know it's an old cliche, but that normally refers to 2 different team performances, whereas on this occasion it actually referred to the influence of the video assistant. Edin Terzic, after the game himself, also made a point of referencing the extent to which he believed the VAR delays disrupted the tempo and the rhythm of the game and perhaps prevented Dortmund from getting into a real flow. Maybe. I think it's a legitimate complaint to make. On the other hand, you can quite legitimately argue this season that Dortmund don't necessarily need VAR delays to stop them getting into a decent flow. There's as Chris was saying, there's been enough examples of that this season. However, it's also true, and they showed this in the second half on Saturday against Union. It's also true that Dortmund are slowly coming into something resembling a little bit of form. The last few games, starting with the 1-0 win over Wolfsburg, then going on to the win away at Hoffenheim, where they fought with 10 men for a period. And then what I thought was actually a very decent performance against AC Milan, albeit without the goals. Could yet cost them dearly, but it was a decent performance. And then this second half performance against Union I thought was actually really, really good. So there's slowly some glimpses of light for Dortmund, I think.
Chris, the Füllkrug goal, I think, and Matt points it out, 6 minutes, and they actually mentioned it on the official Bundesliga.com app as well. So Matt, you got it right. It was 6 minutes. 23rd minute, the goal was scored. That was the Füllkrug equalizer, or taking off equalizer, right? And in the 29th minute, they decided it was offside. That's 6 minutes. Like, how do we account for that time and the amount of time it takes? And how do we get better with this?
I mean, it's not just a question for Germany, is it? It's a question for, they're asking the same question in Italy, they're asking the same question in Spain, asking the same question in England. Champions League are using semi-automated offsides, which makes it a lot quicker. But yeah, until they do something, me personally, we're going down to like millimeters, which I know the law's black and white. And if any part of the ball that can legally play any part of the body that can legally play the ball is advanced the second last defender, it's offside. But there is still in the law that you could be level. Where's level? If you'll never get level if you can go down to 2 and 3 millimeters. It's a difficult one, but it shouldn't be taking that long. And then obviously the penalty. Once again, is that a good use of it? The penalty is no penalty on the field. Is it a penalty? Subjective. Is it a clear and obvious error? That's something else you can chat about. But yeah, it did stop and start that first half. But as Matt's already said, Dortmund sometimes don't need any help from anyone to have a bit of a bad half. But they really turned it on second half. It was all I said to you. It was almost like a cup final at times. It was completely end to end. Like there was a lot more on the line than 3 points. It's fascinating watch that second half.
Chris and Matt, I know, Matt, you and I in particular had a very emotional exchange in our WhatsApp chat. It's too bad Stefan isn't here because he got involved as well. But how would you guys feel about a coach's challenge for VAR instead of making every decision go through review? They do this in hockey here in Canada and in the US, where basically the referee gets a coach's challenge. And if he gets it wrong, it's a 2-minute penalty. So, they have to be really careful about this decision. And it works particularly well for offside. They use it for other things as well, but offside is one where it comes out quite often. And it has to be clear and obvious. First you, Chris, how do you feel about that? And of course, Matt, feel free to chime in as well.
I'm going to say no, because I would have said yes, but now there's a subjective element to offside. So it's an absolute, it's black and white. That's changed. There is a subjective element to it. So especially if someone has deliberately played the ball or not, that's subjective. And I think there's that. And refereeing myself, I know for a fact that most players don't know most of the laws of the game. So I wouldn't appreciate that many coaches do. I listen to post-match interviews.
Can I quickly insert that? Like, wouldn't that force coaches to know the rules better? Because if they get it wrong, there could be a penalty involved.
I mean, yeah, potentially, but I'm still of the opinion that VAR works if it's not overused and if it's not. So that, for me, that penalty at Dortmund is the wrong use of it, because Hummels puts his foot out to block the ball, in my mind, and it's the follow through, the kick that kicks into his foot. I don't think it's a careless challenge. I think he goes to block the ball. It's subjective. The penalty wasn't given on field. I don't feel that is an overturned error. I don't think it's something that I should be getting involved in. And obviously, then you've got the delay. You've got to go over to the screen. You've got to look at it. It's re-refereeing that area. It's the age-old question: when does it come in? Because we all thought it would come in for, blatant trip or someone's punched the ball over the line, like a Maradona sort of thing. But there's no creep in it. But then there's certain times it can be used and certain times it can't be used. It's just, I wouldn't say it's been rushed in, because it's been in for like 5 or 6 seasons now. In fact, probably even more, because you lose 2 years of COVID. Forget how long it's been in. But I don't think it's been brought in particularly well. I think it's a good idea, but it's not being executed very well, and it leaves a lot of ifs, buts, and maybes, which doesn't help because it was supposed to stop that.
What do you think, Matt?
To be honest, I'm a little bit reluctant to sort of go too much into it, because I think that fundamentally football's just got itself into an absolutely terrible mess. With everything, and it's not just the day-to-day or game-to-game implementation of it, or the various interpretations of various laws. I think you can debate that all day. Just goes to reinforce the subjectivity of the whole thing, to be honest. But I feel like the whole experiment right from the start has been based on a fallacy. This fallacy that you can achieve an objective perfection in football, and I'm of the opinion that you just can't. And I suppose then it comes down to 2 fundamental readings of the game, and to the fundamental degree to which you are, or to which anybody is happy to sacrifice, I suppose, the flow and natural spontaneous enjoyment of the game in order to achieve this perfection. I think there can be degrees of that. Personally, and that is just me personally, I'm not prepared to really sacrifice any of that. And then when people say, "Oh, but you need to get the decision right," I disagree. I don't think you do. I think football's fine. And I think, especially when it comes to, I think Chris just mentioned before, the issue of things going down to millimetres on offside calls. As far as I was aware, if you go back to playing football in the school playground, the point of the offside is to stop people goal hanging. That's the point of the rule. Is to stop players goal hanging, and to make sure you don't end up having 3 strikers stood up front waiting for long balls. That's the point of it. Now, if you need calibrated lines to measure millimeters between players, then as far as I'm concerned, the rules has already done its job. I think if you can't see it with the naked eye, then it can't be that much of an advantage. So I would leave it, and I mean that because I'm not personally prepared to sacrifice the flow of the game and the experience, and that's fine. I think it's fine if people disagree with that. That's fine. But I do come to that conclusion from the point of view of a supporter and an observer who's often in the stadium, and I make no bones about that, and I make no excuse or no apology for that.
And you shouldn't. Honestly, Matt,
and it absolutely does. It affects it. It affects it a lot. And I think I was. In fact, no. I think it was. I mentioned it to you on the chat a couple of weeks ago after the Dortmund-Hoffenheim game. And again, I'm not saying that I would necessarily get so wound up about it. However, I absolutely do sense a quite tangible anger in stadiums in Germany at the moment, week in, week out, these decisions. And I do worry a little bit about how far that could go when the anger boils over. We often praise German fans for their how organised they are, and how we praise them for their protests and holding clubs, leagues, associations to account, ensuring that football doesn't get too ridiculously over commercialised. However, those same forces can also go in the other direction, and they can be used to be quite disruptive if they want to be. And I do wonder if football's pushing it a little bit, because it's becoming quite unbearable. That first half, Dortmund Union, like I tweeted at the time, it was seriously unenjoyable, and I wasn't even at the game this time.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there, and I think you make a really excellent point about this need of perfection.
Manu, can I just jump in there?
Yeah,
Matt, you're going to go
it.
and play football later on this evening as we record this. And the beauty that used to be about football is that if you and I were playing this evening, we play to the same laws and the same expectations at the very top of the game. And it almost, if you bring in too much technology, it almost splits that. And then it doesn't help anybody else who isn't using that technology, because the expectation when people watch the television is that degree of almost unachievable perfection, as Matt's already said.
I'm with you there.
So goal line technology, I think, is brilliant because it's instant, and now it will malfunction occasionally, but it's instant. It's there as a ball crosses the line. No, it's not over by 1 millimeter. And I know I'm saying about offside being a millimeter, but the law says the whole of the ball's got to be over the line. So if it's not 2 millimeters over the line, it's not. Now, you're not going to get that on a Saturday. I appreciate that. Someone's going to say either it's in or it's not, and it's best guess at that instant. But if you can have instantaneous result, then why not? Because it doesn't slow the game down. But I have noticed the past maybe year and a half that there seems to be a grasp for 100% perfection, and you're never going to get it. And maybe that's, most of it's subjective anyway. So you can have a VR intervention and it's subjective. But that's why referees don't change the decision, or sometimes they do change the decision. Sometimes it's how well does the VAR argue their subjectivity. It's re-refereeing at times.
That's, Chris, why I like the coach's challenge, and you just give one for each coach, and they have to get it right. Which, my suggestion would be you take away a substitution if they get it wrong, right? And maybe don't do it for something like offside. Do it for like a penalty, a missed penalty, But I am with you with this need of perfection, because you're not going to get that. And I read this really interesting article about baseball where they tried to bring in it's called a robo-arm. Don't ask me why it's called that. Where they basically replace the umpire with a computer that decides whether a pitch was thrown right or not, whether it was a strike or not, right? And they got the system perfect, but they actually didn't go along with it because they didn't want that sort of perfection. The players and the umpires didn't like it. And I think, there is almost like a beauty of not getting it always right. if that makes sense. And that kind of resonated with me when I read that, with what's going on in football at the moment.
Unfortunately, though, Manu, and I'm playing devil's advocate here because I would personally happily see it all scrapped. But devil's advocate argument is that particularly professional football has got itself into such a situation where these decisions can be worth millions, if not billions, of euros to clubs and leagues and advertisers and sponsors and nation states and whatever other
that's why you need to rein it
there
in.
might be. Yeah,
you need to rein it in. You need to limit it, right? You can't you can't have a situation where you have a half like this where there's 16 minutes spent on VAR.
Also, by the way, on that note of 16 extra minutes, this was a point made at the start of the season. I think as a result of the extra time that had been added in the Qatar World Cup games and also in the Women's World Cup games, about if you tally up all these 10-minute, 12-minute extra time or injury times over the course of the season, you're almost looking at like an extra game or so for players. And I wonder actually what effect that could have, and not just on the players' health and well-being and their recovery times, but I've also noticed sometimes on some of the TV schedules where the TV, particularly, again, depends on the country, I suppose, but here in Germany on Sunday, it was DAZN who had the broadcasting rights for the 3 games, and given that on that particular Sunday there were 3, it was all quite narrowly scheduled, one after the other. If you have one game then lasting 15 minutes longer, you end up missing the start of the next game. And again, that might just be a minor annoyance for a fan watching on telly. However, it could have serious financial implications for sponsors and rights holders, etc. So it's throwing up all sorts of issues. And again, just on the issue of challenges, that is actually somewhere where even I would be happy to compromise on that, because I think it's maybe a little bit utopian and unrealistic to expect the AR to be totally scrapped. However, I could maybe get on board with some sort of challenge thing, one challenge per half. Yeah, maybe.
We should move on and talk about Union Berlin here, but maybe I think we all, this was obvious from this chat that we had, but I think we are all more or less in agreement that it needs to be reined in. The current status is not acceptable. I think we're pretty much in agreement there. Okay, Chris, Union Berlin, let's move on because I think we could talk this entire podcast just about VAR. I do think it's a fascinating topic though, but Union Berlin, what's going on there? This is their longest losing streak since they've been promoted in the Bundesliga, of course, across all competitions, but even just within the Bundesliga. Is it too far to say that they've been found out, or is it just the chemistry isn't there yet because of all the moves that they've made? You've recently written about them. Tell me your thoughts about Union Berlin. What's going on here? This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. Football is back, and BetOnline is your #1 information source for all your sports wagering info with all the up-to-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals from the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistics, news, and odds. From Week 1 all the way to college football playoff and Super Bowl, BetOnline gives you access to the best football promotions and contests available anywhere online. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Yeah, when we were chatting just before we started recording, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because they've been, I wrote earlier on in the season, the only thing that you shouldn't be surprised now about Union Berlin is, the only surprising thing about Union Berlin is that they shouldn't surprise you anymore, because they are a very, very good side. I think they've maybe not abandoned their principles, but because they've made the Champions League, they've maybe looked at bringing in a different type of player that maybe hasn't been seen before. They've always balanced, since they come into the Bundesliga, they've always balanced a little bit with experience, with youthful raw talent. And of course, they've lost some of that youthful raw talent as well. But they just don't look the same unit that they did maybe 2 seasons ago. And it does play into that fear that I had at the end of last season, which I was delighted they made the Champions League, because it was it was real good thing for them, because they deserved it and they qualified, and it wasn't by luck and it wasn't by any sort of fluke. They were absolutely deserved their position. But the step up from the Conference League and the Europa League to Champions League is massive, and clubs find it hard. Leipzig found it very hard to balance Tuesday/Wednesday football domestically. When they came into the league and they finished second, and I think they even qualified for the Champions League the season after. They just missed out, didn't they? And I've seen it before where a smaller side just doesn't have the depth and the reliability to play these top level games. I know they were unlucky midweek, but it's a massive change in tempo of football that they've now got to do week in, week out until Christmas. And then how's that going to affect the rest of their season? If they have a bad start to the season, by the time Christmas comes around and even the winter break, it could be too much for them. But yeah, I thought they were played through the middle. If you look at the last couple of seasons, they've been great at stopping the attack at its very most prominent point. So the high press they had, they were able to turn over the ball quickly, and their speed of attack was lightning. And they just don't seem to have that at the moment. And I don't know if it's a bit of fatigue or it's a bit that they've brought in a slightly different profile of player that hasn't fitted Fischer's mantra that he's lived by since they got into the league. And I do feel sorry for them, because they had to do something, because they've gone into the Champions League. If they'd not brought in the sort of experience they have this season, you could argue that they get absolutely wiped in that competition. That does nobody any favours whatsoever. But yeah, it's a difficult one for them. It's tough.
I think you touched on some really interesting things here, Chris, because I like their signings in the summer. Gosens, of course, is a fantastic signing, right? And he has been actually playing really well for them. Volland comes in, he hasn't quite had the impact. Geraldo Becker was the man for them, right, midweek against Braga. A game, I think you're right, they were quite unfortunate to lose. Bonucci comes in. Bonucci scores against Dortmund, makes it 2-1. And you would have in the past, that would have been enough for them. 2-1, you would say, okay, well, they're going to be very disciplined in the second half. They're not going to allow the Dortmund come back in. And then Dortmund score 3 unanswered goals. And that is, I think, something where I see a bit of I almost wonder if the new signings that they've brought in have ruined their chemistry a little bit. And it just will take Urs Fischer some time to, as you said, balance the fact that they're in 2 competitions, or with a bigger competition now with the Champions League, right? With the new faces that come in, and higher profile faces that are maybe not quite as used to digging in as these. In the past, they would sign players that had they needed Union Berlin for a second chance, and they used that, right? So they were willing to dig in and get the job done. And I wonder maybe if these guys that they now brought in, if they kind of ruined the chemistry a little bit. What do you think here, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it can come across a little bit unprecise, can't it? Just saying ruining the chemistry. It's like, but how do you mean it? Do you mean it in terms of how they all get on together on the personal level, or the tactical chemistry? And to be honest,
the tactical chemistry, I would say.
I think there's a bit of both, to be honest. And I think particularly tactically, in terms of intensity of pressing and pace through midfield. I feel like they were 2 issues that really cost them against Dortmund on Sunday. If you think particularly for the counter-attack goal, which is started and finished by Brandt, and basically in the middle of that features Marco Reus, who, despite his many qualities, he's probably not known for his rapid driving runs through midfield, but that's what he was allowed to do.
Can I just say one thing here, Matt, real quick?
Against Union.
One thing real quick, because the one thing that maybe we need to also point out is Schlotterbeck scores an absolute screamer, right, to equalize. Yeah. And they have been a little unlucky with that, because that's also what happened to them against Braga.
Yeah, I think you can say that. There's not much you could do to legislate for either the Braga win or Schlotterbeck's goal, but I think they could have done more for for the other Dortmund goals. I was just mentioning the Julian Brandt one started and finished. I think you can do more to stop Royce in midfield. Again, not taking anything away from Dortmund, I thought it was a really, really well-worked goal, particularly Brandt starting and ending the move. And also for the deflected Julian Viersen effort. Again, you can talk about a little bit of bad luck on Union's part because it's taken a massive deflection. On the other
goalkeeper,
hand,
though.
yeah, on the other hand, the goalkeeper, and also I think in the build-up, I also wondered, and maybe I'm being overly critical here, but could Robin Gosens have got a little bit closer to Julian Brandt down the right? So yeah, it just seems like they're lacking those percentages in whether it's pace through midfield, getting tighter to men down the flanks. And whether that is a result of having brought in new players who maybe don't bring the same physical intensity, which Union built so much upon previously, or whether it's less quantifiable issues such as the human chemistry in the squad, them not being typical Union signings, or the mixture of all of those. It probably is a mixture of all those factors ultimately.
Yeah, it's hugely fascinating. Chris, do you have any final thoughts on this before we move on?
No, I think both absolutely nail that there. It's true. It's just something that we're going to have to wait and see, reevaluate maybe during the winter pause.
There is maybe one thing I would add, and that is I wonder if it does have an effect on them in terms of recovery times and mental preparation by effectively playing 6 Champions League away games. I mean, I know they don't exactly have a bad record at the Olympic Stadium. They've beaten Hertha there enough times in recent years, but it is obviously a completely different environment. You're playing I think it has actually a slightly bigger pitch. Not that it makes a huge difference, but I think it is actually bigger, and it must take a lot. It adds up. It must have taken an awful lot out of them playing defending the way they did for 92, 93 minutes in the Bernabeu as well. Where you can argue they're also a little bit unlucky with the win, but it must take a lot out of them. And the mental adaptation of having to play in front of 73,000 of your own fans, which Union Berlin have never done ever. It's an awful lot of changes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, guys, let's move on to the next topic. Want to briefly mention the start because I think it's absolutely insane. This is the first time in Bundesliga history 3 teams have scored 22 goals plus in the first 7 games of the season. Bayern, of course, with 23, Leverkusen with 23, Stuttgart with 22. Stuttgart just don't want to go away. Hey, I'm really, really sorry if you listen to my fantasy Bundesliga advice and sold Sergio Guirassy. I was wrong. I apologize. The guy can't stop scoring.
That sounds like a bit of insider trading, that, to be honest.
Oh my goodness.
recommending that people take Sergio Guirassy out there.
Well, let's be honest here. Like the underlying stats suggest that this will stop at some point, right? That's just how it's supposed to be. I didn't think that he would add another 3. Come on, no one
in 15 minutes. Yeah, it was impressive.
Let's be honest here, that's crazy.
Yeah. And I turned up to the Stuttgart game this season last week when they played in Cologne for the one game that he didn't score.
Oh, that is crazy. 14 goals now in his first 7 games, which is a Bundesliga record, right? It's 13 goals, in 7 Bundesliga games. It's a new Bundesliga record. And it's also the most he's ever scored in a single league campaign. His previous record was 11. It's just crazy. It just doesn't stop. Of course, the other team is Leverkusen. Chris, Leverkusen, title candidate? What do you think here?
No. No, that's a very flippant answer. And I only say that because I said yes the other year, and then after Christmas, the arse fell out of them badly, didn't it? And I looked absolutely stupid. But currently, they're playing very, very good football. And title's a big word because it's a marathon, isn't it? At the minute, they've started very, very well. They just got to keep going. But yeah, their football. And I rewatched the highlights this afternoon, and some of those goals, it's just real fluid football from front to back. they are playing exceptionally well. My only fear with Leverkusen is when they do, or when they're at the very top of the game, it only takes a slight wobble, and they tend to fall off rapidly. Now, maybe Xavi Alonso is the person to rectify that. We'll have to wait and see. But I still believe they've got a very, very good squad, one of the best in the league. It's just, can they grind out those awful results that teams need around February 1-0, or if they're getting beat 2-0, can they drag back and get that draw that's needed? And obviously that's hypothetical at the minute, but going on current play, they are playing fantastic football from front to back. Keeper, still an issue for me at some point, maybe. Nice guy, met him many a time, sat down and chatted with him, but prone to an error occasionally. Is that going to come up? But at the minute, they're playing very well, but I don't know if they've got what it takes to be a sustained title challenger come May.
Well, I got burned really badly the year after. Remember, Chris? I tipped them to win the title, and
You did.
and then they got almost relegated. Anyways, I got burned often enough by Leverkusen. And Matt, you said in the chat when I suggested that wait till March. That's probably a pretty smart suggestion. Before you go to anywhere and put a bet down on Leverkusen, maybe wait till March. But they are very good, and they did dominate Cologne in that game. I guess it's not a derby because Köln lost. I've learned a long time ago, it's only a Rhein derby when either Gladbach or Köln beat Leverkusen. Otherwise, it's just another game. But Matt, we do need to talk a bit about Köln, because there is a lot going on here. I said this in the preview show, but they look like a side that could actually get relegated. And they're such a massive club. Of course, they've been there many times before. Köln is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you live in Köln, right? What's going on here?
I mean, the first thing to say is that FC Köln are a club who can always get relegated, at least in this century. And I don't mean that facetiously. I mean, I think since 1999 they've been relegated 6 times, which also means they've been promoted 6 times, which also takes some doing. However, they are the embodiment of a German yo-yo club.
Do you know a German word for it, Matt? You want to try that?
I will know this, but you've caught me out. You've caught me out for a second. Fahrstuhlverein.
Yeah, very good.
Rescued it. Well, you had me panicking for a sec. Yeah, no. I almost said Aufzugsverein, but because Aufzug's another word for a Fahrstuhl, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You got to bang on. Well done.
Yeah. Woof. Save myself. Anyway, where was I? Cologne. Yeah. So they can always go down, and I think this year, although there's obviously a long way to go, it's only been 7 out of 34 games. However, it's really not looking good, and unfortunately for Cologne, there are actually quite a few factors stacking up that are not in their favour. Factors was actually started a while ago, but maybe probably just start with this season for the time being, or at least with the weekend. They've been a little bit unlucky this season. In fact, I actually think that the game of the weekend was probably the only game, ironically, where I think they were really comprehensively just outplayed, and they had absolutely no chance. I think there can be absolutely zero complaints from Cologne. Leverkusen absolutely wiped the floor with them. However, in the previous 6 games, it's not actually been the case. Cologne have actually played relatively okay. However, they've always lacked that final bit of quality. It's not even a bit of quality, and they've lacked a lot of quality in the final third. The best example of which was the first day of the season away at Dortmund, a game which I was at, and I was shocked by how poor Dortmund were, but I was pleasantly surprised at how incredibly well organised Cologne were, and then how well they broke. But they didn't score, and what could easily have been a 3-0 win away at Dortmund to start the season. And watch the highlights back, or watch that game back. That's not an exaggeration. Suddenly turned into a 1-0 defeat, and what has happened since then has happened. with the squad that they have, Manu, you mentioned over the weekend, is this a Cologne team which looks like it almost given up, or I don't think it's a Cologne team that's given up, and I think even asking around Cologne, the club, the city, the fan base, I don't think anybody is suggesting that any of these players are not giving their all. I think there's an appreciation that they are, and that also Stefan Baumgart is giving his all as a coach, but I think there's also an acceptance.
I don't think he cannot give anything.
Exactly,
I've met him.
Stefan Baumgart.
Yeah, I mean, I've interviewed him last November, sat down, and I had actually it's one of those interviews where it was when they were in the United States, right? So we had lots of time, so I had actually a chance to really chat with him, and he strikes me as a character who will never give up. He's a little bit like, I don't say they're the same person, but he's a little bit like Christian Streich that way.
Absolutely, I don't think anyone would accuse him of that, and not nor the players. But I think there's an acceptance that they're not good enough. They have a glass ceiling, and it's quite a low one. And that's not so particularly surprising when you look at the players of the calibre they've lost. Obviously, this season they've lost Jonas Hector, who took a relatively semi-early retirement. Elias Skiri also left. And there's two absolute linchpins and two examples of genuine international or at least semi-international quality in the centre of a Bundesliga midfield, and that makes a combined with Florian Kainz, the captain this season. That's a massive hole, particularly when you hear that both could also slot in either fullback position as well. So you lost that. Added to that, a couple of years ago, they lost Anthony Modeste's goals, and don't forget that he scored. He did score 31, didn't he, for them, or almost 28 or 30. They lost those goals, and it's as much as Anthony Modeste's obviously underwhelmed massively at Borussia Dortmund, and probably was only there because of the tragic news around Sebastian Haller. He was a massive part of that Cologne team because they live in different worlds, Dortmund and Cologne. So at Cologne it absolutely worked. Similarly, Salih Özcan actually he's not been particularly bad for Dortmund either since he's signed. However, he's gone from being a really standout midfielder of game-changing quality for Cologne to being a player who's still battling to really make his mark on Borussia Dortmund. That's the difference in quality that you're talking about. And given Cologne's financial situation, they've not been able to replace any of them. And that leaves you with a logical conclusion, doesn't it? That the squad is lacking 4 or 5 of their best players, and they've not been able to replace them.
Yeah, and I'm just looking up these Bundesliga stats as well. And what strikes out were their shot efficiency is minus 4.7, so they're underperforming the XG essentially by 4.7, right?
Oh.
But then you look at their squad, and as you said, Anthony Modeste is missing. He would have been the one who would have put those away, right? And I look at this squad overall, and they have a guy like Davy Selke up there, right? A perpetual underperformer. Tigges, is another one who some people I think hope that he would reach a certain ceiling.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about strikers who, in Stefan Tigges, came through Borussia Dortmund's reserves, but ultimately can be said to have failed to make the grade of Borussia Dortmund. That's not to say that lad's a bad footballer, of course. That's just that the grade is so high. Relying on him, he's not even making Cologne starting lineup that regularly either this season.
There's a lot of bats in that squad, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're kind of hoping that someone overperforms, but it's just not happening, and it's actually almost the opposite.
Yeah, you look at in Davy Selke, you're looking at a player who's already failed to make the breakthrough at Hertha, at
Leipzig,
at
Bremen twice,
RB. So you're relying on him, and it must be if you go to the other end of the pitch. I believe Jeff Chabot, the centre back, was picked up from a Serie A team who I forget exactly where he came from. You might be able to correct me. But he hadn't been playing. He hadn't been playing for 6 months there either. But he's also coming back into the team, and as much as I thought he did a decent job last week in doing a man marking job on Serhou Guirassy against Stuttgart, he's massively lacking for pace and can be quite easily caught out. Not Stuttgart, Cologne must be really wondering why Serhou Guirassy couldn't work out for them a few years ago. When in Cologne he's remained in the memory mainly for missing an open goal against Werder Bremen a few years ago, and yet here he is scoring 13 goals already for Stuttgart. So that's a massive frustration as well.
And they can't really do anything because they have this transfer ban hanging over them.
Yeah,
right?
The transfer ban is interesting. I'm not sure how much people are necessarily aware of it. It actually started off as quite a niche issue. So I'll go through it as briefly as I can. Basically, this all came about in January 2022. Cologne signed the then 16-year-old Slovenian youth player Jakub Potočnik from Olimpia Ljubljana, who, to cut a long story short, basically accused Cologne of effectively inciting or tapping up his forward via his mother to get his contract terminated in order to be able to sign for Cologne for free, and thus costing Olimpia Ljubljana a transfer fee. So obviously Ljubljana have then gone to FIFA. FIFA eventually initially ruled in their favour and hit Cologne with a transfer ban. Obviously Cologne appealed that to CAS, Court of Arbitration for Sport, which for the time being have actually lifted the ban, but only temporarily until they reach a proper conclusion themselves. So as it stands, Cologne have not been handed a transfer ban yet, but depending on the Court of Arbitration for Sport's decision, that they could yet be, which is obviously already having effect, because which is just the very fact that every other club in the transfer market every other player and agent knows that Cologne have got this hanging over them. It makes every other transfer negotiation more difficult. So they have that hanging over them. Then again, even without that, Cologne are in such financial difficulty that they probably would have their hands tied anyway. I think the last figures which I saw from Cologne for at least for the last financial year noted around 50 million euros of debts, and even that's come down from about 66 million, so it was even worse. This is a result partly of COVID, obviously, and there are outstanding debt to be repaid to the state here. I mean, Cologne, along with some other clubs such as Schalke and some others, actually took out loans which were backed up by the federal state in North Rhine-Westphalia. But those loans also need to be paid back, among other loans. And then there's also the fact that they're still battling to recover from the most recent relegation, which effectively cost them any of the prize money they got from the Europa League in 2017 when they were in the Europa League for that one season. So to cut a long story short, or maybe not that short, Cologne are in quite a mess, and the fixtures aren't getting any easier. They're already 7 games without a win now. After the break, they've got Borussia Mönchengladbach, which, as you mentioned before, is a derby which even Cologne,
that's a real derby.
Even Cologne will consider that one a derby. Even if
it's actually one of the biggest derbies in Germany.
Absolutely. I mean, sporting wise, there might be an argument to say they might fancy their chances a bit more against Gladbach than against Leverkusen, where I think absolutely nobody expected them to get anything out of that game yesterday. But then again, even Gladbach have had a couple of half decent results and are slowly starting to come together a bit. So that's by no means a given. And after that, they've got Red Bull, which you really can't see them winning. And after that, it'll already be November. So you're looking at Cologne potentially being into November, 9 games, and potentially only a point on the board. It's a really, really bitter situation.
That reminds me a lot of, what was that year where they almost reached a comeback and it, the hole was just too deep. And Chris,
yeah, they look 17, 18 bad at the minute.
Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me. But that was the year, and the hole was so big. Kind of like when Schalke went down too, right? The first time. Chris, when you down this deep in that big of a hole, let's say you match day 9, you have 1 point, that's almost impossible to come back from.
Yeah, it is. And I think when we did this podcast back in like 2017, 18, I think by the time we got to the winter break, I think they had like 3 points on the board and they were awful and everybody knew they were going down. I think from memory serves, they did recover a little bit, but it was too far gone. And if you look back at that side, and Matt's already mentioned, I don't think that side now is as good as it was then, because that side had qualified for the Europa League. I remember them played really well at the Emirates Stadium. I can't see that at the minute. And my fear for Cologne is that if they go down, are they going to come back up again? Because I think the world's changed after COVID. We're seeing clubs go down. We don't see them again. Arminia Bielefeld's probably the most outrageous example of that. But Schalke don't look like a team that they were. It's going to be tough for them because they have got some big games coming up, as Matt's just said there. Then I think looking at the schedule for them at the moment, maybe you can only see them picking up some points against Augsburg or Bochum, but no one wants to be playing 6-pointers in early November at all. It's going to be difficult for them. You both mentioned they're not even scoring. They got like 4 goals this season. They've just been battered. Are they going to get battered again? It's a difficult one because we've all seen that teams once again on that downward spiral. It's almost impossible for them to recover. And I don't like to look at the table until match day 10, but I'd be looking at the table now as a Köln fan because we're on match day 7 and they've got 1 point on the pod.
I think that's a really good point that Chris makes regarding how the economic reality has changed for the entirety of German and European football. As I mentioned before, Cologne are no strangers to going back down. They've gone back down 6 times. They've come back up 6 times. But I think Chris is right that this is actually different now. Schalke are a great example. Bielefeld, as you mentioned, but also that second division is getting more and more packed with clubs who are in the situation of Hamburg, Schalke, Hanover, potentially Cologne again, Dusseldorf, the list goes on. It might actually get to the point whereby, ironically, Hamburg, having now been in that division for 5 years, is actually much more to their benefit in that the club is now completely structured to be a Division 2 team rather than a team like Schalke or Hertha or potentially Cologne or even a Mainz, who are also having a bad start, going down now with the economic difficulties that surround them. They're not going to have the 5 years to stabilise that, say, Hamburg have had, despite everyone laughing at Hamburg for those failed attempts at coming back up. So it's a really dangerous situation. If there's one perhaps silver lining, if you can call it that, at least for the time being, and yet this can also change, it's that the atmosphere and the attitude and the Stimmung in German around the club doesn't seem to have changed yet. If Cologne are known for anything that's not relegations, it's for having a pretty volatile, a volatile support, a support which is incredibly large and incredibly loyal, but can also be quite volatile.
We have a German word for that too, Matt. What is it? I'm putting you on the spot again.
I don't know. I can think of several. I'm going to go with Kölsch.
I was going to say Chaosverein, but
Chaosverein. Okay. Yeah. I think Kölsch works as well. But
yeah.
However, this time at least yet, and again this can change over the course of the season depending on how bad things get. But I've not sensed yet that there is that attitude around the support and the club yet that this could get very, very volatile and ugly. And I wonder if that's maybe just is also rooted in an acceptance of how things are. And I'm going to just quote a couple of things here because I was listening to a very good podcast here this week called Rasenfunk, which if anyone speaks German, I do recommend people listen to it. And they were speaking to Axel from one of the FC Cologne podcasts and another podcast over here, and a Cologne member. And he was basically going through the conclusions which came out of Cologne's recent AGM, and that was ultimately quite calmly that Cologne have three choices here. Either they continue the policy of selling off whatever they can around the club in order to fund themselves, which is what they were doing under the former finance director Alexander Werle, who's now at Stuttgart. And that policy is not wanted because it involves effectively selling assets against their future value, and that's not wanted. Also, they've got nothing left to sell. That the catering's been sold, for example, so they've got nothing else to sell on that front. Option B would be sales of shares and investments. We've been through this topic, haven't we, before on the podcast about how German fans see that, and particularly in Cologne, it's a perfect example. They're a club who, they might have separated the football division out into a commercial entity, but that commercial entity is owned 100% by the club, by the members, and they have actually just voted to scrap a clause in the club statutes, which would allow the board to sell 12.5% of shares in the case of emergency. So now the club can't even do that. Now the sale of a single share in FC Köln now has to go via the membership, even in the case of serious economic emergency. So that's not wanted either. So option C is what they're left with, which is effectively make do and mend with what they have, and somehow try. And this goes down to Stefan Baumgart and the director of sport, Christian Keller. Somehow scrape together a team which can survive in the Bundesliga and come at least 16th and give themselves a fighting chance. And that's for the time being. That seems to be, again, this is based on my experience, that would seem to be the acceptance around Cologne at the moment. However, whether that will last another, how many games have we got to go? Another 27 match days? I don't know.
Well, on that happy thought, we have to wrap it up. So Köln is definitely a story we're going to keep an eye on.
At least it's carnival soon, so things will pick up.
At least it's carnival soon, so drown your sorrow in Köln. Yeah, that's I hope to make this a positive podcast, but I failed utterly. I'm sorry. Anyways, we're definitely going to address Köln again this season. I know we have a lot of Köln listeners to this podcast. I know it's still, because we have a lot of listeners from the United States, and it's still a surprisingly massive club in the United States, which dates back to the 70s. So we want to address this again. So we're going to have Matt back to talk about this again. This was a really good summary of what's going on right now. Let's hope it turns around. But we are out of time today. So this show is brought to you by Bet Online. Before we wrap it up, though, Chris, what have you been up to? Where can people find you?
So people can find me on Substack at CW78 on Substack. They could find me on Twitter at Chris78Williams, but I've come off it because it's full of lunatics. So whilst my profile's still on there, I'm no longer active on it. But you can find me on Substack.
Fair enough. Matt, how about you?
I'm considering following in Chris's footsteps, to be honest. Again, it's a different topic, and a topic that I don't really have much expertise in. But it is, it's a complete mess, isn't it? Social media at the moment. So Twitter as usual for the time being, but I don't think that'll be going on for much longer. Otherwise, international break, and then I'll be back afterwards. I think the first weekend back is, I think, Mainz against Bayern, I think, after the break. I think I'll be going to that. So
awesome.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to club football too, but first I'm looking forward to the rest of my holiday. Guys, thank you so much for coming on. This was a pleasure. Matt, great analysis of Köln. Wish it was more positive, but next time maybe. We'll be back soon. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
In Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.